since I speak Arabic, a lot of times I was the first American they could ever talk to if they didn't speak English. And, they'd ask me crazy questions, and I'd ask them, I'd learn about their lives and about what they cared about. I remember when my first year at Bold and the Beautiful, I don't know if anybody remembers that soap opera. I don't know if it's still around. It was before the internet, so there's only like 5 stations in Cairo, and cable TV. And so everybody watched it. I guess this woman, she married one of the brothers, and then she divorced him and married the other brother. And this guy serious is like, it's just normal in America that this happens. And I had to explain to them that this is just television. No, this is not normal in America. So in that period, you have in the opposition side a bunch of different poles and factors. You have Al-Qaeda, you have ISIS. But on the other side, you have a lot of moderate sort of shopkeepers and business owners and others who just, want to get rid of this tyrant, Bashar al-Assad, and form a new democratic Syria. I think as anybody knows who's dealt with local government, well, how can local government be most credible and received well? By doing things like picking up the trash.
I mean, I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I've been here for 12 years. In the last mayoral race, there was a sign some people had in their yards that just said, I just want my trash picked up. That's what they were going to go on, right? And it's funny, but it's also, that's not, people are people anywhere. Mm-hmm. Of course, we care about that.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. We're back with episode 2 of Unsung Americans, a podcast where I talk with frontline aid workers to hear their stories about American foreign assistance in plain English and why it matters. I'm your host, Alex Natsios. Thanks to everyone who tuned into episode 1 last week, where I got to talk with my dad and hear from one of our greatest foreign aid leaders. Now, I actually live in Missouri, so I get to interact with people with quite a variety of perspectives, and that sometimes means a preconceived notion. People bring a preconceived notion about what foreign aid was before it was largely dismantled. So since launching last week, I've already gotten to have some pretty interesting conversations in response to the first episode, productive conversations, I would say. So please like, share, and subscribe. And that share piece, I think, please share, especially with friends and family who may not be familiar with what the work really looked like. All right, we're back. I'm your host, Alex Natsios, where we interview Americans who had a large impact in representing American interests overseas and serving national interests and doing good work. Today, I'm particularly excited to have Garrett Dorer, who has spent a maybe disproportionate amount of years in his professional career overseas, and maybe not disproportionate, but a lot of years, Garrett, right? I think in all seriousness, the phrase, thank you for your service, that is, we associate with the military, and deservedly so. I think in particular, there are certain people that have really kind of earned that thanks from us as Americans. And I would put you in that category in particular, Garrett. And we can come back to that, and I don't want to put you on the spot with any of that. But when I talk about wanting to really showcase what the work really looked like in the field that USAID was doing and all the foreign aid workers were doing, the real frontline work, I don't know of a better person to talk to than you. So anyhow, glad to have you. And we can get into a bit maybe what your background is and where you've worked, and we'll go through, we'll talk what some of that work looked like on the ground and what you accomplished and why we were doing it. But maybe first, just feel free to kind of introduce yourself and maybe tell us what got you into doing foreign aid and international development work.
Yeah, well, I'd start, I'm Garrett Dorer, obviously. As you said, the short story of getting into international work is by accident. And, I started with the Peace Corps. As a lot of you probably have experienced, when you finish your undergraduate degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to travel and learn another language and have an experience, but I didn't have any money from a very middle-class background. And so I walked by the Peace Corps booth and I said I would go anywhere and do anything in the world. Because I wanted to go have learn something new, have an adventure, and have somebody else pay for it. Which, by the way, they pay very, 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 very little. It really is.
Oh, I know. I used to work at the Peace Corps. Yeah.
And so I wound up in Tunisia, and I wound up working with farmers, and out in the countryside. I learned some Arabic. I had this great experience working with people and meeting people. And then, after that ended, I went on and I did a master's in Cairo in Middle East Studies and was working on my PhD in New York. And then somebody came to me who I'd met and said, well, would you like to come to Cairo and work on a project for 9 months in kind of a junior position? We need to close it out. We need somebody who can write in good English and do some reporting. And so I said, okay, I'll go for 9 months. And that was 25 plus years ago, because I liked it. I liked doing stuff. I liked being out there working with people, making a difference, and also representing, my country, and showing people that we're positive, good people. And that just went on to different jobs in Egypt, in the Palestinian territories, Israel, 3 different times there, working with Syrians from Turkey, and really during the revolution, working in Iraq. And then a lot of other places in the Middle East, with, of course, some time here in Washington, D.C. As well. And that. So, it's been good. I've really enjoyed doing what I'm doing and really been out there and stuff like that. So it's been an adventure. I'm not expected. It was supposed to be 9 months. And then each time I said, okay, I'll do another year. I'll do another year. And it just like every time, was something that was both valuable and I think I thought really for me and I think for what I was doing for our country and the people on the ground.
Yeah, as having lived overseas and done the work, not for nearly as long as you have, but I wish we could have a whole separate series that was, where there was no controversy, given that USA has been dismantled and there's been a lot of headlines on the topic and everything, and it's gotten unfortunately very, very political when it really hadn't been throughout the course of either of our careers, I think. But
yeah.
I almost wish I could do just a series that's just on the adventures and just purely about because aid workers most of us are adventurers. That's that's part of the draw. It's not actually necessarily, and in a good way. I don't, not. I don't mean that shouldn't sound loaded at all. It's not.
Yeah.
But Cairo. I love Cairo. You spent a lot of time there. Egyptians are a lot of fun.
No, they are, and wonderful people, wonderful hospitable 100%. People who. You'll never. I used to have to shut off my phone because they kept calling me up and dropping by to go out with me, take me out for coffee, have food, inviting me over. Like, okay, I just want some time by myself. Just like very social, very, very kind and decent people.
I had the exact same experience in Egypt. Yeah. So maybe we can jump in to talk about some of the projects that you led. I mean, you've led quite a few long-term programs in the field, largely or almost exclusively in the Middle East and North Africa. Maybe we can just start with, actually a lot of these programs, I think we should be framing them for what they are. Many of us who did the work, you included, I think, saw that there was a need and we wanted to serve other people. You wanted to serve other people. We can talk about that. But these programs in particular that you worked on were absolutely serving U.S. national security interests and U.S. interests, right? Yeah. So anyhow, looking forward to kind of diving in and getting into some of that. But maybe just walk through, kind of start with whichever program you kind of think has some exciting kind of history and stories.
Well, I think everything has its own story, as you know, Alex, and again, like each one's distinct and stuff like that. But maybe I'll start by talking about Syria, because that's still in people's minds, and I think it's current today because of with the transition in Syria and the new government, and still trying to figure out what's going on, and so that engagement lasts. I think some of your audience will remember back, and maybe not, that there was obviously a revolution in 2012 that started in Syria. And that started with student protests and a lot of popular nonviolent work. And then the government of Bashar al-Assad at the time attacked them with the military. And then the opposition started fighting with weapons. And then it developed into a civil war. So in that period, you have in the opposition side a bunch of different poles and factors. You have Al-Qaeda, you have ISIS. But on the other side, you have a lot of moderate sort of shopkeepers and business owners and others who just want to get rid of this tyrant, Bashar al-Assad, and form a new democratic Syria. And a lot of thousands and thousands of students, young people who've taken to the streets to support things. So, when we came in, the U.S. foreign policy, of course, goal was to support the moderates, right? Because you don't want Al Qaeda and ISIS to be strengthened. And U.S. did that with some military assistance. But also military is not enough. We had to work to help these other more moderate groups and the student groups and everything be more credible in their communities, to be able to, to manage their communities. So we really engaged directly with them and provided them with assistance to really do things in their communities. So that's new local councils, and it's simple stuff. It was simple stuff. It's like being able to fix the electricity that had been blown up during battles, restore water, pick up the trash, help clear rubble that had for blown up buildings. I mean, we were just supplying like the equipment, power lines, transformers, some resources to garbage trucks. We shipped garbage trucks so that these new government areas in parts of Syria that were led by the anti-Al Qaeda and anti-ISIS forces could become more credible and really be relevant in their communities. And I think, as anybody knows who's dealt with local government, well, how can local government be most credible and received well? By doing things like picking up the trash.
Yep. I mean, it's funny, but it's how true is it? I mean, I live in St. Louis, Missouri. I've been here for 12 years. In the last mayoral race, there was a sign some people had in their yards that just said, "I just want my trash picked up." That's what they were going to vote on, right? And it's funny, but it's also, that's not, people are people anywhere. Mm-hmm. Of course, we care about that.
Yeah. Or education for their kids. I mean, we're helping people, like a lot of U.S. assistants help restore the schools and to keep the kids in school. People care about their kids going back to school, right? I mean, it's a basic thing.
And anyhow, I think that makes a lot of sense. Just even talking about those kind of simple things starting out there, some of it may seem obvious or feel obvious to us or to some people, but to other people, why do that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's the flip side, right? If we don't support the moderates or the people that share our values and are countering, ISIS, Al Qaeda on the ground, then those people will lose their support and their credibility, and ISIS and Al Qaeda will win. And other groups supported by Iran, supported by Russia, supported by China, people who don't necessarily have the United States interests at heart. And then, I think the classic example more than that is dealing with Northeast Syria. I think maybe your audience knows that ISIS controlled a large portion of Northeast Syria and a large portion of Iraq at one point, and those are very diverse areas with Kurds and Christians and Yazidis. It's a small religious sect, was also persecuted and killed by ISIS. And so the U.S. military, with a coalition of forces, pushed them out of Raqqa, the areas of Northeast Syria, and then out of areas in Iraq, and largely defeated them. There's still some elements left in places in Syria and in Iraq, but nothing like it was before. But after that military engagement, then you need to come in and fix things, right? There's a lot of destruction, and you need to show people that life is better not having ISIS and Al Qaeda there. That there is a future, and that these are, that moderate people are credible leaders and they can lead your community and they have the resources to do that. And so that's where we came in, right behind the military. And I can share a picture with you if you want to put it on the site, before and after, for example, a roundabout, a traffic circle in the middle of Raqqa, which was completely destroyed. And one of the first things that my project did was to fix it. We didn't fix it. We provided resources to the local councils, the local leaders to fix it themselves, because they did everything. We just provided them with resources. And that's visually, and I think you can imagine like a big symbolic thing, right? To get the power back on, to get the water back on, to fix the roads, to remove the rubble. And then that was repeated in Iraq after ISIS was defeated there. I had a little part in starting that. And then in Iraq, again, there was a lot of Christians in I think maybe your audience knows, it's one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, right, is in northern Iraq, in the Kurdish area on the edge of that. Obviously ISIS drove them out. They massacred people and stuff like that. They were refugees. And so also helping them return to their communities, restore business, restore services and stuff like that. So they were comfortable coming back. And the same for this other small sect called Yazidis, who were also persecuted by ISIS. And that prevents ISIS from coming back, right? Or what they call ISIS 2.0. So maybe it's not called ISIS, but it's something else. And then we have to send our military back, which costs a lot more money and lives and effort. And I don't think anybody wants that. That's you don't want. And that's we call it stabilization, but it's really preventing future need for the military. As I say, it's a much cheaper way to do it. And reminder, it's not like me going in there and fixing a roundabout. It's us as a project, as a country, supporting local people who want to have a positive future for their communities and who we agree with, share our values, and we want to help them do that. They're our friends. They're in the league. We're just supplying like tractors and some money and some resources and power pieces and things they can't afford themselves during these crucial times.
And speaking of money, and not to go off on a tangent with this, but it continues to weigh on my mind like it does many other aid workers' minds because of the misinformation that was sort of as part of a bad bill of goods, I think, sold to the American population media, that USAID was some huge percentage of the national budget. The foreign aid budget was less than 1% of the national budget, and that's a fact. And what you're talking about here is a fraction, actually a fraction.
Small piece of that. Yeah.
Fraction of a percentage of and again, talking about the investment, what ends up being a small investment, it's probably pennies for each American taxpayer. What I'm hearing is you go into one of the most unstable, high-risk areas where Christians have been persecuted and massacred. Then you have the different parts of the American foreign policy machine working together, where you have the United States military, and hats off to them for pushing out ISIS. You can't forget that. And you're the first one in afterwards. And
oftentimes, yes.
Oftentimes, and in this case, we were talking about helping Christians return to, and Yazidis return to their communities, right? And just restabilizing things there. I think the only other thing I maybe want to put out there that maybe we don't isn't as much in the headlines is, where did ISIS come from originally?
That's a debated question, of course, in academic and other literature. It was an offshoot of Al Qaeda in Iraq, and it was even more radical, obviously, and it was there are we could make the debate. Part of it had to do with breaking up the Ba'ath Party and the Iraq security services after the Iraq War. There were some members of that who also joined ISIS, but that's a longer story. But a lot of that came out of disaffected people as well. That they felt that they were missed out in the thing. I mean, there's a lot of studies that the people in ISIS weren't particularly religious when they started. A lot of them were just disaffected youth who basically felt marginalized in their communities. They had a sense of grievance. This offered an outlet and stuff like that. That doesn't make it right, obviously. It's still a very evil organization and trend, like its counterparts in other countries in the Middle East, and should be opposed. But we have to understand chaos, lack of opportunity and stuff does breed. It's a breeding ground. For some of those people, I mean, 90, if you have 98%, which is the case, go on to have productive lives and do things, you will get a certain percentage in conditions like that who will turn towards groups like ISIS and others, unfortunately.
Yep, and that's not a unique phenomenon to the region, frankly. But again, that's a different discussion. Yeah. And obviously, my probably slightly loaded question was offshoot of Al Qaeda. And actually, when you think about them being more extreme, that means they were more extreme than the group that flew airplanes into the World Trade Center in September 11th, 2001, yes. Right?
The crazy of the crazies. I mean,
crazy of the crazy. So to just connect it back to things that any of us, anyone back in the United States who maybe doesn't want to leave the country and wants to keep the country secure, just something to think about, right?
Yeah.
But anyhow, maybe the follow-up question I just have on some of that work you were doing on the ground in Syria. There's a group I'm familiar with because there was a fantastic documentary made. I think it might have won it. It might have won an Oscar, the White Helmets documentary.
Yeah, I think it won the Oscar for documentary, best documentary, short documentary.
And this is several years ago, peak of the war and fighting, I think. But
Yeah.
maybe just speak a bit to that group, the White Helmets, how they formed, what they did, where they've ended up, and but also what they achieved, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we talked about supporting these moderate groups, right? And one of them was the White Helmets. And basically, they started right when I first started working on Syria. They were a group of people who started a voluntary search and rescue, fire and first response group. So they it's like the ambulance fire. It's like everything your fire department and your ambulance and would do, not the policing stuff. And also, search and rescue, which is important when you've got bombs falling on buildings all the time and stuff like that. I mean, you have to go through the rubble and find people and save them, right? So they were just starting in northeast Syria as a group of volunteers. And we had the privilege and the opportunity to provide them some initial assistance along with the British and others. And again, led by them, but we provided them with, initially with the British were providing them some training, and the Turks who are experts in search and rescue, because I think you're probably aware they've had some very large earthquakes. Right. So they have some of the best search and rescue teams in the world. Mm-hmm. And so they provided training to the search and rescue aspect. The British provided training on humanitarian response, and we provided equipment. So as they grew, we provided fire trucks and loaders so that they could excavate places and get bodies out. We provided ambulances and other things like that. And then as a coalition of us and European partners provided with, help them provide the very small stipends. I think it was like $150 a month to their volunteer members. There's about 3,000 of them. And also just like spare parts for the machinery, shipping those in so they could keep things running and stuff like that. They went on to do, they went on, I mean, they were active throughout the war. They also documented a lot of human rights abuses and bombings and stuff like that very accurately. They did a very good job on that. They created women's groups, parts of their thing to work specifically with women in the community and teach better health stuff and again, to respond to emergencies. And then went on to, I was took bride long after I left. I don't know if you remember, there was a big giant earthquake in southern Turkey and northeastern Syria that killed thousands and thousands of people. And I was really, took pride to see on the news as I was watching. Now, it's a horrible event, but I saw, our ambulances and our fire trucks and the loaders and cranes and the uniforms of the White Helmets saving people with stuff that we provided. And now, after the success of the resolution of the change in government, now the White Helmets has become a new ministry within the new government, basically. And Raed Salah, who's the head of it, is now a minister, and actually a former staff member of mine on our project, who was fantastic, a young guy who came across from Syria and, was very traumatized. He'd been arrested. He was basically scheduled for execution and then somehow got out. He was about 21 at the time. Wow. And so we'd hired him. Anyway, long and the short of it, time flies by, and now he has 2 master's degrees from America. He got a scholarship. He's married to an American woman who's a very successful lawyer. And now he's gone back to Syria, and he works for this ministry, supporting them on their international relations and a lot of other stuff. So, that's an example of a Syrian who came, got education, really developed into a really successful guy. But he's gone back to contribute to his country now. That wouldn't be there without U.S. assistance. That would never have existed. Those lives would not have been saved.
And just to think about how he's going to represent, how he is going to much more sort of proudly represent the United States, or not represent the United States, but his impression of the United States, his impression of Americans. Yes. And just to think, when we were talking earlier about breeding ground for extremism, someone who stared death right in his face. I imagine this, sadly, not to belabor any of this part of it, but he was probably tortured in prison by the Assad regime, and
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we didn't talk. We had other staff that had been tortured and electrocuted, and they were very traumatized. And again, like providing that opportunity. But they also have all grown. I mean, they're all over the world now, very successful, and a lot of them are working to go back to Syria now to support the transition,
yeah,
and to provide that. Again, they're all like positive, supportive of sort of our view of the world, and really want to make a difference and be influential in their country. And that's the side contribution. I think that's what they call soft power, right? It's those relations and those people and that impression of America that was very positive because of our contribution and
because of
what
how
we
much
did.
we supported that. Our role, and it sounds like we had a significant role in enabling that.
Yeah.
People who could have gone to one extreme and instead are not just doing well themselves, but becoming major contributors and serving in leadership positions in a new government that's moderate. Which reminds me, how did you know how did you and your team and in the speaking to the work in Iraq as well as in Syria, how did you know that the local counterparts and groups and people you were working with were moderate versus somehow actually secretly maybe connected to Al Qaeda or ISIS?
Well, I mean, we did a lot of work on that, actually. We were very, very, very careful. I mean, I think, as maybe your audience doesn't, that there's databases of people who are classified as officially affiliated with terrorist organizations. Of course, the U.S. government has its own intelligence services and knowledge, and they works with other countries. And so for all of our major partners, we had to do something which they call vetting, which means basically a background check. So submitting their information to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government then does its own checks and comes back and says, okay, from our information, that person or group is not affiliated with any of the so-called designated terrorist organizations or groups that are classified as terrorists or radical. But the secondary thing is, we had a lot of really good team members on the ground, and we would triangulate that with our own research. And there were times we found groups, for example, in Syria, that a local council, for example, that was okay with on the major databases, but our team come back and say, no, really, these people are affiliated with so and so and so and so. We know, people know, like I'm sure anybody here from a small town. I mean, I can go and ask them, about the backgrounds of certain people, and they can tell me. And that's what it means to have a good, solid local team on the ground, and a lot of different ways of triangulating information and partners. And you find out, you have to find out, and we were very, very careful about that. And not just because it would have been against the law, but because it would have violated what we were trying to achieve, right? We're trying to support the moderates, so we definitely don't want to support anybody who's affiliated with a not moderate, or radical, or violent organization. So,
100%.
but it's a constant effort, and again on multiple levels, to be very, very careful.
No, that thanks for that. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, for some of my experience doing the same thing in other parts of the Middle East, where we had to go through a particularly arduous and rigorous vetting process and due diligence. Once again, counter to what many we've seen in the media in the last few months about the accountability systems in place. Not that things were perfect by any means, but the system was fairly robust and functional, in particular for doing what you're describing here, from my experience too.
I think from my experience, better than any country I've seen, and better, I would like to say, than any other part of the U.S. government engaging as well. It was very, very thorough and extensive. And as I said, not just the official stuff, but also all the informal sort of research, and having those extensive teams on the ground, which nobody else in the U.S. government has. They don't have people out there who are in these small towns who are working with us. And so because I had staff all over Syria, and then we had staff all over Iraq that we trusted. Nobody else has that network besides a USAID, these USAID projects, and really like a gritty understanding of what's going on, what people are thinking, and what's going on. So,
and it's interesting. I was talking with someone else about. Actually, I was talking with my dad, Andrew Natsios, who ran USAID under George W. Bush. We were talking about this the other day. That we could get what was really happening on the front line somewhere through the kinds of people you're talking about, and these robust networks that we would establish and maintain on programs. And by the way, these are people that are friends of the United States, fully aware that they're helping the United States and that we're the partner, right? It's not a secret to them and all that, but who take tremendous risks in partnering with us, right?
Yeah, in some cases, yes. I mean, like, in Syria, I mean, they were under risk that Al Qaeda or ISIS could come and attack them. I mean, they were also opposing Al Qaeda and ISIS. It wasn't just because we were pushing, we were partnering with them. They were doing that already, and we were just helping them, do that better. But they were taking risks themselves, of course. And of course, it was an open war with the former Syrian regime as well. And so there's bombs falling everywhere. I mean, we talked about the white helmets. I think they've had several hundred of the white helmets killed or injured over the last, 10 plus years. A lot of them were killed or injured, unfortunately, in attacks. And these are people out there risking their lives for things that we believe in together. I wouldn't, just to go back, and I wouldn't say it's collecting intelligence information, because it's not. We're not that. But it is helping our government and us better understand what's going on and what people are thinking, and better understanding helps make better decisions. If you understand who the groups are, who you should engage, what's the level of support for different things, or how should we, if we're doing a media campaign, what makes sense to people and what doesn't. And that's what you get from having these really extensive local teams and understanding the situation is a much better policy, and a much better policy than just sitting back in Washington or in a capital and just, or just talking to the senior leaders or ministers. I can imagine, you couldn't understand what was going on in the United States, right, if you just came and talked to people here in Washington. You need to get out and talk to people in the heartland, and especially not Washington. I mean, it's the same everywhere, right? You need people who get out there and talk to average people. I mean, it's one of the things I did a lot of. I'd ride around, I'd go sit in cafes and talk to people. I have a lot of friends, since I speak Arabic, a lot of times I was the first American they could ever talk to if they didn't speak English. And they'd ask me crazy questions, and I'd ask them, I'd learn about their lives and about what they cared about and stuff like that. I mean, it's all very positive, and understanding, again, breeds better policy, better engagement, and better long-term friendships with people in the region, for us as a country and as individuals.
Yeah, my quick, I can't help it, funny story that you reminded me of myself. I think I was 25 years old, 26 years old. One of the first assignments I went on was to Haiti, and I speak French, and Haiti's a challenging place to arrive in. It's particularly sort of chaotic. The urban poverty is kind of in your face there. And I hadn't been somewhere like that. Yeah, this was the intro to it, I guess you could say. I remember the hotel sent a driver to pick me up, and the guy picked me up, and I sat in the front seat with him because I wanted to talk to him. I was like, this is going to be fun. I can talk to people here, and where many people don't speak English, and even though they might prefer Haitian Creole, most people speak French. And we just had this awesome conversation. We're having a good time. And he pulled over at one point, and he came back with two local beers because he wanted to show me why we were talking about beer or something. And we had a beer before I got dropped off.
You're like, are you sure you should be driving and doing that? You can't do that in America. But Haiti, whatever.
Some places in the U.S., Wild West.
No, I've had that experience countless times with taxi drivers in Cairo and in the West Bank and in Iraq and Turkey. And actually, I think, in Cairo, the tradition actually is that, especially if you're a man, is that you actually do get into the front seat. And when you're by yourself in the taxi, and you talk to the driver, I mean, as a person. It's not like you're a customer, but you're also a human being. And I learned a lot of my Arabic driving back and forth, stuck in Cairo traffic, and about a lot of random stuff, which was interesting to me, what their businesses look like, what they care about. And I think they got to ask me a lot of crazy questions too. I remember my first year, that Bold and the Beautiful. I don't know if anybody remembers that soap opera.
I remember that.
I don't even know if it's still around. So they would play it. This is before the internet in the 90s. They had it on Egyptian television every night, and people were really into it. It's before the internet, so there's only 5 stations in Cairo, and cable TV, and so everybody watched it. But it's a crazy soap opera, right? And so this guy was And there was one storyline where I guess this woman, she married one of the brothers and then she divorced him and married the other brother. And this guy serious is like, is this normal in America that this happens? And I had to explain to them that this is just television. No, this is not normal in America. But it just kind of goes like they had no way. I was the first person who could ask that question to, and to engage on what is it like in America? They learned from television, right, and from internet like everybody else, and me as a lot of Americans the same way. So this type of engagement is important.
I think it really is, and it's a great story and funny, obviously, but I think it does matter in the grand scheme of things, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And there's been discussion recently. And it's not that I want, this isn't to go into the political side of what we're seeing in the United States right now and the massive cuts and destruction of USAID. But the notion that America should be first, and it should be very clear when Americans are providing something and we're doing it because it's in our interest. And why, to be very frank, I think that's a bit silly is not because I disagree with it. I actually do agree with it. And I think a lot of people who do our work agree with it. Not that we're trying to ram it down people's throats that the Americans are here to help. It's not that. But the old USAID symbol was a handshake, and the slogan was "From the American People."
Yes.
The idea that we were trying to keep it some kind of a secret, other than in places where people would be risking their lives, and you didn't want people to know for security reasons. But that was not the norm for the most part. Even in the places where there were security risks.
Yeah.
This is all leading to a question, I promise. When you talk about Syria, Iraq, the local councils you're supporting, did they, for the most part, know it was Americans augmenting them, supporting them, bringing them resources, investing, etc.?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think you said, again, almost everywhere USAID worked, humanitarian development, the type of work I did, stabilization, it's always branded with USAID. And that's whether it's the parks that we worked on and stuff where it has a plaque that says, from the American people. And you can even go to Ramallah today. There's a road that was right outside when I lived there. My house, it said, rebuilt with the support of the American people. That was done like 15 years ago. And the sign is still there. Oh, wow. And you'll see those all over the West Bank, for example. So people do know. As I said, the places where we don't force people, or we didn't force people to put a sign up, is where we get them killed or put them in danger. Or, for example, when you've got the ambulance running around in all these different areas of Syria, you could have created a danger to put the USAID or an American flag on the ambulance. And we don't want to do that. But that said, everybody involved with the local council, they know it's USAID, and we never hide it. We're not the CIA. We don't do anything clandestinely. It's all on the table. And, they sign grant agreements with us. They come to meetings. They engage, whether remotely or in person. When you can, obviously I go around and visit people. It's a lot easier for me than the U.S. government people because I can just get in the car and go most places. U.S. government will show up in their armored vehicles sometimes in different places. But they know exactly who's providing the assistance, and they remember it, and they're thankful for it. That's important to note. It's the 90% had these official branding, and then what didn't? It's not a secret in the community.
Sure.
Who's providing the support. I think, there's more examples of how that's subtle, but, basically people know that the United States is there and they're providing help. I think all of our humanitarian assistance has an American flag on it, no matter where it's going, or from the American people on it. Just on your point, and is that, a couple of years ago, there's an internal survey, and I can't remember the exact numbers, in the Palestinian areas in the West Bank. Since October 6th, U.S. foreign policy, people disagree with us, let's say, on foreign policy. And so the survey asked, do you support U.S. foreign policy? And, the numbers were very small, to be honest. They were under 5%.
Sure.
But do you have a positive view of U.S. assistance? And the numbers was close to 50%. Do you have a positive view of the American people? And the number was 60 to 70%. So that shows you right there that, even when we disagree on policy and stuff like that, this assistance is also maintaining this positive relationship And as you know, never mistake, they don't hate us. They may disagree with our policy, but they don't hate us, and they appreciate really what we're doing. Um, and as I said, even amongst Palestinians to this day, if you ask them, they love Americans. They have a good view of America. They may disagree on some of the foreign policy positions, just like a lot of us disagree on some of the positions as well.
100%.
And they also disagree with their own government and different
So it
groups
makes
as
sense
well.
to them to.
So it's like they make it, they make the distinction, and this is also what aid helps to do. Sure, look, we can disagree on things, but we do share values, and we do share some things that we should respect each other on, and
Yeah.
it also
Yeah,
makes it always felt safe too. I mean, I could show up in Jenin or Tulkarm in the West Bank, or not so much in Syria when Al Qaeda was there. That would have been unsafe, or ISIS. But people could now go, and a lot of my friends have gone to Damascus and other, and still as people, we're welcome, and we're actually welcome with open arms as Americans.
Well, and that's a fascinating. Again, we could talk at length about that. But I mean, I've spent time in Ramallah, Cairo, where else? And anyhow, just using those two as examples, there's significantly more street crime and gun violence in most American cities, Washington, D.C., where you live, St. Louis, than I've heard of cities. But anyway, that's a different topic. But it's an interesting.
But I'm usually more. I live in the center of Washington, D.C., and usually I feel more safe in Ramallah or Cairo than I do here on my street in Washington, D.C.
Other than people driving a little bit crazy in Cairo, or not.
Yeah, the driving's a different story. And the maybe you don't always find a seatbelt, and people are a little crazy in the driving. So that's the biggest risk, actually, is crossing the road. It's
an obstacle course for cars and pedestrians there. It's like a game or something. It's nuts. But anyhow, do you want, is there another, not that you need to, but is there another program or kind of any activities you might want to talk about that you then went on to do after all that great work you did in Syria and Iraq?
Well, as I've hinted, I've worked with Palestinians, 3 different times over the last 20 years. But I'll talk about the most recent time I was there, just because I think people will find it kind of topical, and related to what they're following in the news. Right after, so I was out there, and the USAID had a project to provide. They call it stabilization assistance, but really its goal. I mean, I think. Okay, so there's what's happening in Gaza, which we won't get into right now, but also in the West Bank, there's a lot of pressure on society. For example, 100,000 Palestinians worked inside Israel, and after October 7th, all their permits were canceled, and so they're now unemployed. The Palestinian Authority is a major employer. They also haven't been getting money. There's a whole politics of that, but from the Israeli side, to fully pay salaries. And then a lot of different other things, trade problems caused a huge drop in the economy. About 87% of production and exports from the West Bank go to Israel. And that was also, they changed checkpoints and requirements and stuff like that. But that's neither here nor there. So that puts a huge amount of pressure on communities. And in the West Bank, you also have, Hamas is in the West Bank, and Islamic Jihad is in the West Bank, and they're trying to recruit young people. They have money from Iran and from other places, but the majority of people oppose that, and they don't want their kids getting in trouble. And so this project was designed to help those people who were trying to oppose Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and in some cases just trying to keep their kids safe, to provide more opportunities. So what we were doing, went to one of the refugee camps, meeting with some youth club and women's club leaders and others, and they're like, we just want to create safe spaces for our kids, so that especially our boys, so they don't get in trouble. They can come after school. We've got a football club already, or a soccer club. And then after that, we want a rec room so that we can take them to that. Then we send them home to eat dinner, study, and go to bed. So we don't want them out on the street. We don't want them exposed to these other influences. And so we did that. It was simple. I mean, it was not, we provided gym equipment, some foosball, and other games, and then for the little older kids, there was some pool tables and some other ping pong and some other stuff, and we created a space where they could their kids and could stay, especially their teenagers, could stay safe. And then, the other thing they said, well, the kids are just sitting around on the street. A lot of them, damaged by the conflict, and they're not doing anything. And their role models are these guys who are getting themselves killed, belonging to Jihad or Hamas or these groups. We want to create different role models, and we want to give them something to do. So we had a big program working with, again, local organizations. We weren't doing that. These are local organizations who share our values and we're carefully vetted and stuff like that to just do short-term work for a lot of these young guys and to do it so that they get out and they're cleaning up rubble. They were helping, did some great sort of events for smaller kids, just to relieve the stress. And they did. Some of them were given some equipment. They were already barbers, young guys who graduated from barbers college, but they didn't have the money to get the equipment and set up shop. So we helped them with that. And then they did free haircuts for kids and disabled kids and kids from the camp. And so you can see how that not only gives an opportunity to do something positive, but also they're showing a different way of engaging the community than, putting on a mask, picking up a gun and getting yourself killed. And that's really what people and parents were asking for. And that's what we're trying to do. I mean, there's some great pictures of parks, the pictures of parks so that families can go there and be safe from the conflict and stuff like that. Just make life a little less bad. And I think as we started, when chaos happens and things get much worse, then the pulls to the radical groups become stronger. And so trying to mitigate that through a very bad period of time was what we were really trying to do there. And, the last thing we want is stronger Hamas and Islamic Jihad on the West Bank, chaos on the West Bank, because again, that's gonna lead to military conflict and military conflict that the Israelis will be engaged in, and that we'll wind up having to pay for and be engaged in as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the stuff you're describing, the thing that strikes me too is, I mean, the concept of young men who aren't very well off and don't have anything to do, standing around with nothing to do. Once again, that's not the risk that you have there. 100% applies in the United States too. We talk about this in
Yes.
Lower income areas of the United States is one of the primary causes of crime and the development of gangs or kids joining gangs and things like that. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it kind of reminds me of what you're describing of the Boys and Girls Club of America or the YMCA or something.
I mean, there are these boys and girls clubs all over the West Bank. Run by great people, and they just need a little help with some resources. I mean, we weren't paying them salaries; we're just giving them, gym equipment and soccer balls and stuff like that. I mean, just helping them do activities or a little money. I think the youth activities that they're doing for children. I mean, I think our budget for each one was like $200. They buy some sweets and some snacks, and things are a little bit cheaper there, and everybody's volunteering and again, like feeling some meaning in the community and giving back to the community. It was really, I mean, I talked to some of these boys. It was really meaningful for them. And they're like, I was just sitting home. I had nowhere to go. Obviously I'm not involved in any of these other groups. And, I feel like I want to do something, but I don't want to do that. And we gave them an alternative. That's something positive. And a lot of them continued to volunteer and do stuff in their communities afterwards. So, I mean, I think that's what we would want for kids in similar spot here, right? And I think young men are something we should keep an eye on. I mean, and really support because they have it hard in a lot of these situations. I mean,
exactly. And not to get too doom and gloom, but that project was canceled, though. That you
it was
as part of all of this.
As part of all that. I mean, again, like I don't take it personally because everything was canceled. Sure. But it was canceled, and it is a loss, I think, on the level of what we were doing and to engage as the pressure continues in that part of the world. But also all the engagement with all the local leaders and other counterparts and organization leaders and local leaders, governors, everybody else we engaged with through those projects as well, and showed again that we were there to help with the moderate side, and we were there with them to oppose Hamas and Jihad and all these groups as well. I think it's a big loss. I hope it comes back, and that similar sorts of activities will be done. And I have faith that, let's say, strategic minds within the State Department and our government, they do know this. The military, they know this, and they speak and say, we need this part of our foreign policy toolkit to be successful, and that prevents the military having to be involved. That saves us money in the long run. That sets the basis for positive diplomacy. So I think there's enough people who know that I am hopeful that those wiser heads, I mean, even on the Republican side in the Senate, who are very supportive. I mean, what's his name from us?
Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham spoke recently in a committee hearing. It's like, this sort of assistance, stabilization assistance and stuff, this is an essential part of what we're doing. He was very, very firm in that. And this is preventing us having to send our military. This is reducing the need for sending our young men and women to risk their lives. And as we all know, that costs a lot more than less than 1% of our federal budget. Hundreds of billions of dollars instead of a few millions.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I want to ask any more questions because I like what you actually ended on, since many of us, I mean, I was an aid worker for 19, now I think it's 20 years, but, there's a lot of heartache and sort of a lot of us are, I'm sure, including you, are demoralized, but I'm glad you sort of, maybe we ended on that. But maybe I should actually, instead of jumping the gun, is there anything else you wanted to?
I mean, I think that's a good place to end. And again, let's not look backward at this point. USAID, as we know it, is gone. There's no sense in trying to resurrect it. But let's look forward. I think this is probably the next series of discussions is what should it become in the future? And I think we have learned a lot of lessons. I'm the first person to say, with a lot of my colleagues, that we could have done some things better. But I do think overall we created a very positive effect there's a lot of really positive effects that we created, places that the fact that you don't see ISIS in large portions of Syria right now, just on the edge, is, I think, partly the effect of this, success in Iraq. I mean, it may not be perfect now, but it did help. It does, these are important interventions. So I hope we can take a good, strong look at how we did it, how we could do better, and then recreate, re-engage at some point. Yeah. And again, as I said, I hope there's a lot of smart people in our government and outside of our government and who believe this. Even the authors of Project 2025 were not calling for the dismantling of foreign assessance.
No, that's right.
They were just calling for a refocusing and an examination. And a lot of their findings I agree with. Not all of it, but I think nobody was calling for it to be completely eliminated.
And the throwing the baby with the bathwater out is what's happened, and that's what they also hope going forward we can rebuild something and avoid something so foolish and careless in the future.
And again, I couldn't have worked most of the last 25 years in that part of the world without being a little bit of an optimist. So I am optimistic that things will get better. You have to, of course, preserve your own mental health. So and it's no sense again in just being, it's time to move on and look forward.
Let me just say again, thank you for joining us today. Also, truly thank you for the work that you did in the field on behalf of the United States and serving people overseas. We'll be in touch, and again, thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. And again, it's been a pleasure. It's really, really good. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks again for listening, folks. Please tune in next Friday for episode 3 for more interesting stories. See you then.